most up-to-date stats on playable races, and while it's like 35% of players are playing some version of an elf, people really don't like the Earthen, with less than 0.5% playing the Alliance version. Furthermore, some races, despite being in the game since forever, are also not exactly popular. Looks like the pandaren never really became mainstream, and the dracthyr population seems to have increased a little bit over the past year, despite quite a bit of backlash within the community. However, based on these stats, let's see how the haranir are also going to perform, as personally, based on the recent reception, I don't think they're really going to outdo the Earthen by a lot, but of course, time will tell. So let's look at the current stats that we have. Warhammer, Red Dead Redemption, WoW Game Time, Destiny, you can get all of this at amazing prices with my link in the description below. You also got mobile top-ups, software, a bunch more with the best prices on the market. Better yet, if you use my code DORON, you will get another discount on top, so click my link in the description and get the best deals ever at Gamivo. So I've talked about this about a year ago when we first got this really interesting information that was super cool to look at, and that might have kind of been the reason as to why Blizzard was doing certain things, as we realized that like 35% of the players are playing some version of an elf, with Blood Elves alone being 15% of the game. That kinda might explain why the Void is invading Qualtalas, why there is so much Elven lore recently, why many main characters are elves, and also, as the Night Elves are just around 15% as well, it might explain the entire recent Night Elven capital and such, and it might even explain the haranir, which are strongly linked to the Night Elves. However, I thought it would be interesting to look back on this statistic, most importantly because we've had some races that were absolutely terrible. I mean, we had like 0.2% of players playing Earthen, making them literally more rare to see than certain mounts in the game. Now, realistically, with the competitive aspects of the game, I mean, people pick a lot of races to play just based on the racials alone, but if the information of this statistic tells us anything, it is that people really prefer the bread and butter races, and they really don't like the more goofy looking races, I don't really know how to put it, that are not that imposing, like the pandaren, gnomes, goblins, Valpyra, and the like. Keep in mind, the info I'm talking about is coming from data for Azeroth, which is not like Blizzard officially released their inner stats that they're working with, but I would say it is pretty accurate. I mean, it analyzes the Warcraft armory and everything that is publicly available to come up with various statistics, and now looking back a year later, some stats have actually changed. I mean, there have been some trends. In my initial video I was shocked at how 0.2% of people were playing the Earthen, and I've kind of chalked it up to the War Within being so new, so many people didn't even get into the new race yet. But now, as Midnight has officially started with the pre-patch, I think we've had enough time for the stats to line up, and they have increased, but barely. I mean, I'm talking about moving from 0.2% to 0.5%, which of course is a pretty big increase, but let's not pretend like it is any sort of a significant change. Furthermore, it's important to know that we're looking at this based on max player characters, as we all got a bunch of different alts on various levels. Now, to be fair, the stats are a bit skewed. As I said, most players play the core races, the ones that were here from vanilla, and it might be because a lot of people started playing back in the day and have kept the same mains, but still some races are just not popular no matter how long they have been in the game. For example, gnomes have been here since the start initially, and they are only at 1.9%. Draenei, together with the Lightforged Draenei, are just under 5%, which is not actually that bad, and the pandaren are doing really badly, like 2.5% of players across both the Horde and the Alliance are playing with him, with the Alliance pandaren being at only 1.2%. I'm a bit surprised that the Worgen had not gotten more players, as they are more savage looking race, and have been in the game for a really long time, and they're also humans, which are pretty popular, just humans alone, but Worgen are also only at 1.9%, just the same as the gnomes. Technically more people play the Valpyra than they play the Worgen, which personally I've found surprising. Now, interesting enough, it does seem like the dracthyr population has increased slightly by a few decimals, and we're now looking at close to 5% of dracthyr players across the Horde and the Alliance, but personally, I don't think that is because the community really loves the dracthyr. I think it is because they have their own unique class, so in this case they're different from any other race that we have on this list. I'm guessing if the evokers were available to other races, we might see a smaller dracthyr population. However, a race that people are really not a fan of now multiple years into the saga are the Earthen. I'm talking 0.5% the Alliance and 1.2% across both factions, so Horde and the Alliance combined. Now, this is an increase, as I said, but still, like, every 1 in 100 people are playing the Earthen. I think the big reason for that is because, like, when it comes down to it, I mean, they're literally just a reskin race. I mean, they're barely any different from the Dwarves, and keep in mind, Dwarves are actually top 5 table races right behind the Orcs and right under the humans with 5% of people playing them. So it's not really a Dwarf problem, it's more that the Earthen are just not that interesting. I mean, more people are playing the Horde Earthen. I'm guessing that is because you could technically be a Dwarf within the Horde, but these numbers are still very, very low. Now, I would be interested to revisit this in about a year to see how the haranir are going to be doing, but personally, my predictions is that they might barely do better than the Earthen. I think Blizzard might have realized how unpopular the Earthen are, so they decided to make a race that is like an offshoot of the Elves and the Trolls, which are still the most popular races, but somehow I don't think that is going to hit the mark, as there is barely any hype about the upcoming race. What I personally don't understand is why does Blizzard seem to be pushing these random, like completely random races when they got so many that the community has requested over the years that have also been a part of the factions like the Ogres or the Naga, for example. Instead, they decided to just reskin Dwarves in the War Within and give us Haranir, which really seems like cut or moved content from the War Within into Midnight. Also, based on how bad the hype has been for Midnight, like objectively so far, I don't think the Haranir are going to be that much of like a deciding factor. I mean, you can just see based on the official videos that Blizzard released, like overviewing the upcoming race, people are not exactly crazy about it, just based on the video views, the comments, and the general mood about this discussion. Based on the fact that they're technically a new race and not a reskin, I think they may be more popular than the Earthen, but I don't think they're going to overtake them drastically. Also, the Haranir so far seem really weird. I mean, based on the lore that we had discovered in the beta, where they're turning them into these like ever-knowing children of the earth that know every event that ever happened, yet they never did anything, and literally no one ever saw them, and no one even knew they existed, which kind of tells you that they were just shoehorned in. Plus, the burning of Teldrassil was like the biggest blow to them, yet they decided to come out of hiding and join the Horde that literally burned it like a few years back. Also, initially there were some changes to them being older than the Trolls, than being the Ancestors, and the in-between, and so far it really seems like they have been plagued with contradictions, and I don't think Haranir is like the main card they should have played for this expansion. I honestly think they should have added them as an allied race like in BFA with multiple of these allied races, and then kind of just like throwing these guys in together. As a standalone new race, I don't think people are really going crazy over this. Still, overall, I think it is pretty interesting to see stats like this, which really is the best indication on how the game is doing and what is going on, as it's just pure data, like no subjective feel over it. Of course, lore and the looks are obviously not the only factor. Personally, I think racial abilities and also some other things like in the past, how you could only be a Horde Paladin by playing a Blood Elf, were probably the more important factors. However, it will be interesting to see how the Haranir fall into this, and honestly I can't say I'm too optimistic. I really hope Blizzard starts throwing some really fun races our way, like the Vrykul, for example, in the last Titan. Thanks for watching. Check out the recent news we got of Kalendor being revamped in the near future by clicking on the screen, and check out my newly opened Witcher channel by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time.